Welcome to the Life in the Red podcast presented by the Lincoln Journal-Star, your source for Husker news, analysis, and more. From football in the fall to recruiting in the summer, we've got you covered. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Basnett, Parker Gabriel, and Stephen M. Sipple.
Okay, sorry. People are texting right at the wrong time. Come on. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome in, Life in the Red podcast. I'm Chris. There's Sip. There's Parker. It is 3:38 p.m. here on Wednesday afternoon, December 8th, 2021. Nebraska has an offensive coordinator. Nebraska has an offensive line coach. Nebraska has a men's basketball team that can't shoot the ball or play defense. We're going to talk about all three of those things today. We'll start with the big news of the day, which is, of course, Nebraska making official the hires of Mark Whipple and Donovan Raiola as offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, respectively. It's exactly 1 month since Scott Frost fired his 4 assistants and had these openings on the staff. There's now 1 opening remaining on the staff. We'll touch on that a little bit too, probably, but got 3 or 4 hired. Mickey Joseph, of course, last week, and now Mark Whipple and Donovan Raiola. So Parker, Sip, you guys have been on top of this from day one. I'll let you kind of take it from here, and you can take us through the process and how we settled on these 2 names.
Yeah, Parker, go ahead, start it off, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, the first thing that happened, and I think we've podcasted one time where Mickey Joseph was on the radar screen last week, but it hadn't been formalized yet. That was when we podcasted last week. So that was announced on Friday, pretty much finalized Thursday night, and announced Friday morning. And then it was actually a similar timing mechanism this week where we knew about Mark Whipple and Donovan Raiola. We knew about him as candidates over the weekend, for sure. Raiola even going back further than that. And then got wind. It actually sort of started in a weird way yesterday when the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported that Mark Whipple had resigned as Pitt's offensive coordinator. And of course, they just won the ACC title on Saturday night, and they're going to a bowl game, and Kenny Pickett's a Heisman finalist, their quarterback. So it was interesting timing when he resigned. We knew he was one of the 2 main targets along with Graham Harrell. And so when he resigned, it was pretty much, oh, well, we know who they interviewed this weekend. We know that it's probably going into negotiation phase. And then here is a guy resigning from his current job, sort of all lined up. By the evening, we had a pretty good handle that it was happening, and it got announced this morning. So it's very interesting. We can talk about the hires in general. We can talk about Mark Whipple's timeline, which was super interesting. Just been a wild ride for him from Saturday night onward to now being Nebraska's OC. So yeah, it's really interesting, Sipple, and it's an interesting pairing with Mark Whipple, who's 64, 40-year coaching veteran. He's coached at all levels. Basically, he's been a head coach, 2 different stints at the Division I level. He's coached in the NFL, coached Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh. And then Donovan Raiola, who's 38 and has not been at every level and doesn't have a world of experience. So it's a very interesting duo that they formally hired this morning.
Okay, there's a lot we know. There's one question somebody asked me today that I actually couldn't answer, and I didn't even try to fake it like usual. How did Frost get on to Whipple? Like, was there a previous relationship, or was it simply, wow, look what Pitt's doing on offense, look what Kenny Pickett's doing, let's give him a try?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I do not know the answer. The most direct connection that we've found so far is that Mark Whipple, who's 64, attended Brown University at the same time as Ron Brown, who obviously is a senior offensive analyst for Nebraska, longtime Nebraska assistant, all of that. They're about the same age. They went to college together. Now, whether that was the genesis for the relationship or not, that's one of the things I'm very interested in learning from any combination of Scott Frost and Mark Whipple when we talk to either of them.
Or Ron Brown.
Or Ron Brown, for that matter.
Yeah, I'm talking to Ron Brown on Friday. Now, Ron Brown they were teammates. They were football team.
football teammates.
Yeah, we'll see. There, I wonder if that's it. I mean, I wonder if that's the connection that Ron Brown said. Hey, I've known Whipple since we were young guys, but I'd like to know that. The Donovan Raiola connection is obvious. Mickey Joseph's pretty obvious, right? I mean, Bill Bush coached with him. I wonder how much, if there was any influence there. Bush and Mickey are tight. So that makes sense. And like I said, Donovan Raiola obviously makes sense, in part because of, there's frequent contact with Nebraska and the Raiolas because of Dylan Raiola, the quarterback. So there you go.
Yeah, it is.
Go ahead, Parker. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sipple.
Well, it all fell together pretty fast. I mean, considering Pitt was playing on Saturday. I mean, you've talked about this. Pitt was playing Saturday. Whipple was in the Phoenix area on Sunday visiting Chuba Purdy, the quarterback, and interviewing with Nebraska. Nebraska interviewed. I mean, it's really interesting to me. Nebraska on Sunday. This is only Wednesday. Nebraska on Sunday was interviewing Whipple and Graham Harrell. And now, they obviously settled on Whipple.
The only other connection that I wonder about in terms of Whipple is Mike Tomlin. He was on the staff. Whipple was on the Steelers staff. I believe it was the last 3 years of Bill Cowher's tenure there. Before Tomlin took over. Tomlin was the defensive coordinator. And obviously Tomlin is someone that Scott Frost thinks really highly of. They've been in similar circles when Scott was in the NFL. So that would be the only other sort of natural endpoint there. And it all basically adds up to this, which is, Whipple is the kind of guy that Frost outlined on November 10th, when we talked to him about his decision to fire 4 coaches. He's a guy who, as much as Frost is willing to, Frost can sort of turn over the keys to the offense to Mark Whipple. He's been in the game for 40 years. He obviously knows what he's doing. Now, I don't think Frost is going to entirely become a ghost in the offensive meeting room. There's just no way that's going to happen. But I'm interested, and it's kind of early, I think, to really get into scheme and how that all lines up. But Pitt's thrown the ball a lot. And in fact, in acknowledging Whipple's resignation yesterday before the reporting about Nebraska, Pat Narduzzi, in his statement sort of thanking Whipple for his time at Pitt, said the one thing he said about him was that he'd been an asset to the program. And then the specific was he helped turn us from one of the most run-heavy offenses in the country into a dynamic passing team. And so Nebraska fans don't want to hear that Nebraska is going to throw the ball 65% of the time in the Big Ten West. And I don't think they probably will. But that's Whipple's calling card is the passing game and it's quarterback development. And that's his strong suit. That's what Frost went out, found, and said, this is what I want to add in an offensive coordinator.
What do you think, Baz? What do you think of the hires?
Oh, terrific. I don't see anything less than 10 wins next year and 500 yards of offense per game. No, Parker kind of already touched on it, but I thought that quote from Narduzzi was really interesting, turning them from a run-heavy team into the passing attack that they are. I think hiring Mark Whipple gives Scott Frost somebody he can lean on for advice as a head coach. Obviously, a guy that's done it a long time. And if Scott is going to transition more of a CEO role and an overseer role, boy, it's nice to have a guy like Mark Whipple on the staff who's done it at, as Parker said, every single level, and done it at the highest level in the NFL, not as a head coach, but as an assistant, and obviously a head coach in college and a high-level assistant. So I think it's good for a lot of reasons. We saw what happened with Pitt's offense this year, and it took a couple of years for Mark Whipple to get it there. He may not have a couple of years at Nebraska. We'll see. But it kind of makes sense from that standpoint. If you're talking a timeline to get this turned around or not, I think if you're Mark Whipple, you're 64 years old, you go into it knowing you might only get 1 year, but you're going to make almost twice as much money probably as you made at your last stop. And if it works, great. Stick around for a couple more years. If not, well, give it a shot. I made a lot of money. So I wonder how much that was a part of it too. I don't know, but yeah, I like the Mark Whipple hire. I think it makes sense on a lot of accounts. Scott Frost talked about bringing in outside voices, outside perspectives to help with the offense. And certainly this is that, an East Coast guy, a New York native. He's spent pretty much his entire career in the Eastern United States. Now he comes out to Lincoln with some different ideas and some different ways for Nebraska's offense to attack. So in a way, I guess Scott kind of hired a guy that kind of followed what he told us he was going to do when he first laid all this out.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I really like all three hires. I understand the reservations with Donovan Raiola to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know. People, I mean, I hear people poking holes in Whipple, and I don't even know. Then what are you supposed to hire at that point? I mean, he's one of the hottest offensive coordinators in the country.
You know, it's amazing. I understand, like, at 3-9. I know at 3-9, like there's obviously gonna be questions. That's fine. But all I heard through this whole thing in my Twitter mentions, which is not probably a great place to pay attention anyways, but like, was don't like Whipple, don't like Harrell, don't like Brent Davis from Army, don't like Ruggiero at Wake Forest. It was just like no.
Don't like Belichick. Don't like
right.
Parcells.
Yeah, don't like Saban. Yeah.
And then the two answers that usually got yeses were like Chad Morris and Tom Herman. It's like, okay, I mean, I guess if you know the name, and that's what a lot of people like. That is what the proof is going to be in the pudding. First of all, it's going to work or it's not. But people like names they haven't heard of, and Mark Whipple sort of burst onto the scene this year. Donovan Raiola obviously has a connection, which seems to be a point of detraction in some people's eyes for some reason. But so I'm sorry, Sipple, I cut you off. So please.
No, you're fine. No, you're fine.
Donovan.
Well, the Donovan, what the concern is his resume is a little light, especially compared to Jeff Quinn, the Notre Dame offensive line coach, who did produce 3 draft picks in 2021 and is 59 years old or 58 years old. But Donovan, I think on the other hand, Donovan coaching in the NFL for 4 years matters. That matters in a variety of ways. It matters because of the level of preparedness you have to have. The NFL is a very cutthroat environment. He's heavily involved. I hear people say, well, he is an assistant offensive line coach. Why couldn't he get away earlier for a interview? I mean, come on, he's working 14 hours a day. Those guys, if you're on an NFL staff, you're not jacking around. So there's that. Now, so I like the NFL picture. I like the fact that he is the demeanor part of it is good. I think he's Raiola. And all that entails, if you know Dominic, what I've been told is they're very similar. And Dominic burns really hot, played with a lot of fire at Nebraska, Remington Trophy winner, went on to play. Well, he went on to start 12 or 13 seasons for the Detroit Lions. And so now this is not just a guy who's all about emotion. He's a technician. In fact, I saw his presentation that he gave to Frost, and it's really detailed. It's fascinating to read. He's a very detail-oriented technician because you have to be in the NFL. But, he does emphasize that we're going to be very physical in everything we do. I mean, I remember Dominic distinctly telling me a few years ago, and I was fascinated by this. He said he didn't want to lose in walkthroughs. He went through walkthrough like it was a game, and it would piss guys off. But that's the kind of the Raiola way. And I think his brother is, like I said, Dominic has told me his brother's very similar, if not a little crazier.
It's interesting. That's be interesting the first time we talk to him. The thing about Raiola is I don't at this point, probably 4 years in the NFL. I mean, if you make it 4 years in the NFL as a player, you can play. You can really play. If you make it 4 years in the NFL as a coach, you can really coach. Like, I don't there's always a question about how a new guy is going to fit and scheme and how you go about teaching and all of that. Like, I don't doubt the coaching acumen at all with Donovan Raiola. What I'm interested in, what we just don't know at this point, is what he's going to be like as a recruiter. Now, you don't just walk into a place. Sometimes you do at the portal now, but you don't just walk into a place and land a bunch of guys, especially at a position that takes a lot of developing, like the offensive line, and get a couple commits and say, look at me, I can recruit. I mean, it's a very long-term, that's a longer-term conversation. I do think, and this is probably a little bit more of a global part of this whole deal, but with Mickey Joseph on the staff, I do think that probably their recruiting operation is going to be a little bit different than it's been in the past. Like, certainly Donovan Raiola is going to have responsibility, and it's going to be on him to help identify and land guys that can help them up front. But I also wonder, one of the things I'm interested in talking to Scott about is if they plan on continuing to recruit in the same way, where each position coach is sort of responsible for all of his own guys, or if that's going to shift a little bit with the sort of caliber of recruiter that Mickey is, with, you know, depending on what happens, like if Bill Busch ends up on the staff as a special teams coordinator, he's a very talented recruiter. Is it going to be a little bit more focused in that regard, where it's sort of Fisher, Becton, Mickey, maybe Bill Busch as the thrust of the recruiting for every position, rather than each guy sort of, you know, doing his own position? That's to be determined, I think, at this point.
Yes. And then, so they still do have a position to fill, and that's a pretty complex discussion in itself. How they're going to handle special teams. Parker, you got into it on your story today, and there's myriad things they could do there.
I think we agree, just based on all the conversations we've had over the past couple of weeks, Sipple, that Frost probably feels like he needs to hire a special teams coordinator. It seems like he will. We don't know that for sure, but it seems like he will, right? He's going to hire a full-time special teams coordinator.
Yeah. Well, they could stay the same. They have one essentially. See, now what are we? It's really a nuanced discussion.
Well, are you talking about Bush or are you talking about Dawson?
Well, Dawson is one. I mean, he coaches outside linebackers too. So, but what we're talking about with Bush is perhaps hiring a guy like Bill Busch, but he would also have to coach a position. So it's not all that different.
Yeah, right.
Would they hire another Bruce Reed, who was a special teams coach only? And that's what the fan base seems to want. Okay, Bruce Reed. I've always felt that's a little bizarre, and you'll find plenty of people in the football world who say not necessary to hire a guy who only coaches special teams. It's very appealing, and it had to be very appealing. Well, I saw it. It's very appealing because I saw it in action. Bruce Reed made $400,000 a year, and he coached 15 minutes of practice. And that's how special teams coaches all over America do it. They work on special teams for 15, 20, maybe 25 minutes. It's over. I watched a bull practice, the Foster Farms bull practice, because the media could go to the practice, and Bruce Reed coached for 15 minutes, got in his SUV and took off. And, you know, it's a great gig, but it's a strange thing to me that people want that. If I'm a head coach, I'm having my special teams coach a position too, is what I'm getting at.
It's interesting because if you look at,
am I crazy?
Well, no. It's interesting because, like, if you take like LeVar Woods, for example, at Iowa, that's all he coaches is special teams, and they're really good on special teams. The week before Iowa showed again its vast superiority to Nebraska in special teams, we were in the press box in Madison at Camp Randall, and I didn't know off the top of my head, and I asked a guy I know up there. I said, "Hey, how does Wisconsin do special teams? Do they have one guy that just does special teams and that's it?" And this person said, "Yeah, his name's Chris Herring, special teams only." And then he sort of shrugged and said, with mixed results over the years. So, I mean, The question to me is just about how do you solve the problem? Maybe it's with a coach who does only that. Maybe it's with more emphasis or whatever, with Dawson doing it. Or maybe it's with a guy like Bill Busch, who's also coaching the position too.
You missed one thing. Maybe it's with a good kicker, a good punter, and good return man, because that masks a lot of problems. Busch would tell you,
and not lining up in a punt protection right when you're on the left hash with a left foot.
Right. Well, that too.
Also
that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, so it's very interesting. There's a lot of, we were talking about this though, Sipple. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can skin this cat. It's just got to get skinned. I mean, you could have Bill Busch and he could coach running backs. You could put the tight ends with the receivers with Mickey and move Becton to running backs. And then you've got one just for special teams. You could have Frost coach the running backs and Ron Brown be the meeting room guy, analyst. You could promote Ron Brown and keep the special team structure you have if you could convince Busch to stay another year as an analyst, which maybe not. There's a lot of ways to go about it. I just don't think they've quite settled on what their approach in that regard is going to be.
What do you think?
I was just going to say, what do you guys think they will do? I kind of tend to lean towards you guys, where I think they probably will hire a special teams coordinator, but I don't know. Like I could see it going both ways, and it's for everything you laid out. Obviously special teams need to get better, and you need better players, and you need better coaching, and maybe need to spend more time on it, whatever it may be. But it just, like you guys said, it just comes down to how do you do that, and how do you get special teams to a place where they're competent. Let's start with competent on a week-to-week basis. How about that? So, yeah, I don't know.
Here's the deal. Here's what I believe wholeheartedly. I think you have to make Busch part of it. Because of his recruiting ability, also his coaching ability, but his recruiting ability is, if you have Mickey and Busch out on the recruiting trail, it's going to go well. Okay. So make him a part of it. He can also coach. I mean, I talked about it, but maybe I haven't talked about it, but it bears mentioning. Think about 2019 at LSU. Just think about this. Mickey recruited and coached the Biletnikoff winner, and Busch coached the Thorpe Award winner. Okay. Busch has the rare distinction, and probably the only person in America who's recruited 2 first-pick quarterbacks overall. And he recruited both of them. Alex Smith, San Diego was his area when he recruited at Utah, and he was on Alex Smith before virtually anybody. He became a number 1 overall. And then Joe Burrow was asked by Dan Patrick, did LSU find you or did you find LSU? And he said, Bill Busch found me. That he jumped on the table in the LSU recruiting room and said, if we get Burrow, we'll win the national championship. And he made it happen. He had a relationship with Joe's brother, who lived in Houston at the time. Kind of a relationship with the dad, not real strong, but he coached Joe's brother. So yeah, I mean, and it just goes on and on. I mean, he recruited Prince Ama Kamara, Nebraska's last first round pick. That 2005 class of Callahan's, he had a heavy hand in several guys in that class. So I just think you got to make him a part of it and make it work. I wouldn't overthink it. There's a variety of things you can do in shuffling the staff, but I wouldn't make it harder than it is.
I think there's a you never, if you're a head coach, if you're anybody in the world, you never want to take someone's loyalty for granted. But if you just look at where they're at in their career, I mean, I think like Ron Brown has given a lot to the university, and he's given a lot to Scott in terms of knowledge and all of that over the last couple of years on the staff in an analyst role. I think he's probably the one of those two to have the conversation with, of like, hey, look, there's one spot. We're going to hire Bill right now, and then we're going to figure it out. If somebody leaves, because you don't know. I mean, there's going to be guys on the defensive side of the staff in particular, and Sean Becton too probably, that schools are going to call in the next few weeks and see if they can move them, see if they can get them to come to the staff at Miami or Florida or wherever. And when that happens, if they were to lose somebody, I don't know that they will, but if they were to lose somebody, then if you've already got Bush in the fold, he's coached about every position you can coach on defense. You give him a position in addition to the special teams, you elevate Ron Brown to running backs coach, problem solved. It's not like they want to lose any of those guys. But I think if you ask Bush, and this is just speculation on my part, hey, can you just hang around for 6 or 8 weeks to see if we lose anybody? I don't know how that goes,
Yeah.
So so to me, like that's not necessarily the pretty part of the business, but you're trying to figure out how to maximize your resources and put the best staff together when you don't know exactly what the next few weeks are going to look like in other parts of the country. And it's poaching season on the coaching front.
Organizational comment. We're going to get to basketball. We have to wrap this up in 11 minutes. We'll get to basketball, but real fast, Parker. They are in on Miles Brennan. It might be their quarterback target, the former LSU quarterback who's in the portal, Miles Brennan.
Yeah, you said it a minute ago. If you have Bill Bush and Mickey Joseph out recruiting together, it's going to go well for you. Well, they were in Baton Rouge today to meet with Miles Brennan, who went into last season as LSU's starter as the sort of heir apparent to Joe Burrow. He had a torn abdominal muscle, I think, in their third game of the year, missed the rest of the year, broke his arm before the season started this year and missed all of this season too. He's one of the guys. They've got a kid coming in also from Akron for an official visit this weekend named Zach Gibson. So it's really interesting. There's a lot, Mickey made about 20 scholarship offers in Louisiana over the 22, 23, 24 classes over the past couple days. They have a 4-star guy who decommitted from USC, a defensive back named Jaden Gould, who just got done with the visit. There's a lot going on the recruiting front. But the quarterback situation in the portal, Miles Brennan being the headliner, and then Zach Gibson, maybe fitting into the picture somewhere as well. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot going on that front.
Okay, Bass. Last night at PBA, Nebraska lost by 35 to Michigan. What was it?
102-67 was the final score. Most points scored by a Nebraska opponent in Pinnacle Bank Arena. 1 point off the largest margin of victory by an opponent in Pinnacle Bank Arena, also held by Michigan back in March of 2017. I mean, it was bad from the beginning. Nebraska never led. It was tied at 13-13, and that was pretty much it. And Fred Hoiberg said it after the game. His team quit. And I wrote it in my game story. That's a pretty damn strong word to be throwing around when you compete, when you're an athlete or when you're a coach at a high level, a Division I level. And Fred Hoiberg is saying his team quit. It's the 10th game of the season. It was December 7th. It was their second conference game. They're in a bad spot right now for a lot of reasons. They can't shoot it. This was supposed to be Fred's best shooting team. As of today, of the 350 Division I schools that are not transitioning or are Division I, Nebraska ranks 346th in the nation in three-point shooting percentage. They're ahead of 4 schools.
That's remarkable, Bass.
That's remarkable. They're ahead of Mizzou is the only power conference team behind them, which is also kind of remarkable. But this team can't shoot. They had a stretch last night where they missed 17 in a row and 24 of 25 from 3-point range, and they had done a good job of fighting through it the previous couple games, Indiana and NC State. And I think it just finally got to them last night. It affected the energy on defense. It affected everything. And it was bad. It's as bad as I've seen. My first season covering the team was 2016-17. And it's as bad as I've seen. I saw that Michigan game back in 2017 where they won by 36. And that was bad. It was also at the end of the season. I believe it was the last game of the season, last home game of the season. Nebraska wasn't very good. You kind of get why it happened. This one's tough to understand why it happened. This team looked soft last night after not looking soft its previous two games. The inability to move the ball, the inability to play together, the lack of cohesion. It looks like a bunch of individuals out there right now. It looks like a team, and this is crazy to say, it looks like a team that hasn't been coached very well. And that's just crazy to me to say when we consider the fanfare that Fred brought with him when he was hired a couple of years ago. It's remarkable how this team looked last night. It's remarkable how this team's looked at home. Let's think about that. They lost on opening night at home to a low major team, Western Illinois, on their home court. They were behind 19 points in the first 10 minutes against their biggest rival on their home court, and they laid down and didn't fight last night on their home court. There just doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency, a sense of fight. You know, Fred Hoiberg last night said everything's on the table the next couple of days as they get ready to go take on Auburn. That's number 18 Auburn, by the way, in Atlanta on Saturday. So it's not getting any easier. It's remarkable that it has somehow gotten worse since the first night of the season. It's hard to even wrap your mind around what
what's really interesting? There's interesting things in sports. Think about Nebraska it has been a poor shooting team really since Fred got here. That's Fred's deal. I mean, Fred was a fabulous shooter in college and the NBA. His offensive acumen is why he's being paid a lot of money. And they're a terrible offensive team. Now, it's interesting to think about Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker at Michigan State. Mel Tucker's a defensive backs coach. That's what he came up as. Michigan State ranks 130th nationally in pass defense. Some things don't add up sometimes. I mean, how does Michigan State? Well, the one thing that adds up about it, Baz, here's what it is. It's not hard. It's a recruiting issue. It's not, you don't recruit guys at the college level, bring them in. Coach K doesn't bring guys in and say, okay, I'm going to teach this guy to shoot. You bring in shooters.
Yeah. You
don't develop shooters.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a recruiting issue.
Yeah. And
that's the long and short of it.
No, it's sometimes you can make this game complicated. This isn't hard. And Nebraska's got a shoot first point guard in Alonzo Verge. And that's a whole other topic. I know he's a very polarizing player. He does a lot of good, a lot of bad. But these guys were supposedly recruited because they can shoot. But you start to dig into it, and C.J. Wilcher didn't play much last year. This is Casey Tominaga's first year Division I basketball. You know, Lat Mayen has just struggled mightily. For the most part, since he got here after not playing much at TCU. In his first Division I stint. These guys are supposed to be great shooters, and they haven't been. They haven't been able to make the adjustment to the highest level of college basketball. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Sip. It's a recruiting issue as much as anything. You said it. You don't bring these guys in thinking that they're going to magically turn into shooters. And if that's what you're doing, that's a pretty flawed way of recruiting your team. If you're going to build your team around shooters and bring guys in that you think you can teach, you're in for what you got last night, and you're in for a team that ranks near the bottom of the country in 3-point shooting. So, yeah, Nebraska's got problems. They got real problems, and I'm not sure how you fix them. How do you fix them in 2 days before you get on a plane and fly down?
Well, the one thing, Baz, the one thing I say, I'm going to interject, and I know that it feels like the sky is falling, but there's also, this happens in sports. Teams get whipped. Sometimes they don't show up. This could be, this team did show up against North Carolina State, and it fought into 4 overtimes. It fought at Indiana. It played good defense at Indiana. This could just be a bad night, a real bad night. And they could come back against Auburn and kind of reset themselves. I'm not burying the team. There's just, you can't do that. I've done that too many times, and it came back to bite me. That you can't do it. It might have just been a really bad night for whatever reason, you know.
Step, I don't disagree with you, but I think we said that after the Western Illinois game too, and we said that after the Creighton game too. You know, how many bad nights can you have before that's who you are? And again, you might be right. They might find a way to turn it around, but they have one game left on their schedule against a non-power conference team, Kennesaw State, on December 22nd. So you're going to figure it out, you're going to be doing it against the big boys. And at 5-5, 0-2 in the Big Ten, if they do find a way to turn it around, that's a hell of a coaching job by Fred Hoiberg. And that's a hell of a job by those players to pull out of this morass that they're in right now. So we'll see where it goes. These next few days will be very interesting. The next couple of weeks will be interesting. You get into December and, they play on the 11th and they have 8 days off. They don't play again until December 19th after Saturday. So then you play December 22nd. You don't play again until January 2nd. So there's going to be a lot of time to try and figure these things out. So we'll see what it looks like. It was pretty low last night, about as low as I've seen Fred Hoiberg since he got here. And they've got some issues they need to get fixed. So
all right,
we need to get going.
Yeah, we need
Thanks
to get
everybody
going.
for tuning in. A lot of information to cover in a short amount of time. We thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you next week.